The first problem came at 12:37 BST.
We do have a problem which we're working at the present time. We have had a light come on, which is a red line indication that the pH level in fuel cell 3 is at an improper level.
During the hold in countdown at 12:51, NASA discovered there was also a problem with the backup computer on board the shuttle. It wasn't communicating with the other 4 computers. Incredibly, with all the checks that had been run on Columbia, the programs on the computer had never been tested.
This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. At the present time, we are in the process of dumping the program which is in the backup flight computer. It's called the backup flight software, and are going to re-enter that program into the computer. We had thought that this particular problem had gone away, but apparently it had not. And we are also continuing to look at the problem with the number 3 fuel cell.
At 13:41, the launch had been delayed by 11 minutes, and major problems were developing, in particular with reference to the conditions of the crew.
One of the main constraints as far as picking a launch time is the crew rules. The doctors have determined that the crew should not remain in a horizontal position in their seats on the pad for longer than 6 hours, and do not want to have them awake between the time that they're awakened and the time they have their first sleep period in space longer than 20 hours.
At 14:15, NASA picked up the countdown at T-minus 60, which meant that the estimated takeoff time was 16:20 BST.
We have picked up the countdown at the T-minus 60-minute point and are presently at T-minus 58 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. The present countdown that we are in will bring us out to a launch time of 10:20 a.m. this morning.
At 15:59, however, NASA's optimism proved to be unfounded when the problem with the computer still wasn't solved, and it was with great regret that Flight Control made this announcement.
The launch director, George Page, and Center Director Dick Smith have just announced that we will scrub the launch attempt for today. We will stop the clock probably at the T-minus 9-minute point and send out a crew to open the hatch of the orbiter and take the crew back to the astronaut quarters. The earliest time in which we could possibly reschedule the launch will be for Sunday morning at 6:50 a.m.
Clearly a very disappointing day for everybody at Cape Canaveral, but that new target time means that the target time for the launch now is at 10 to 1 on Sunday, just 10 minutes before the World This Weekend begins. So you'll hear the news on that first from us. Well, our aerospace correspondent James Wilkinson is at Cape Canaveral. He's on the line now. James, was it as disappointing as it appears to have been?
Well, of course, it was extremely disappointing, particularly as all the time it seemed as though they were going to get on top of this problem. The first problem that occurred, the fuel cell battery, took no time at all to put right. Then the computer problem developed, and no one was quite sure here to start with what the problem was. They simply said it was a problem with computer software. Then they announced later that it was actually this business of one computer not communicating with the other 4. They nevertheless continued with the countdown in the hope that they could get the problem sorted out meanwhile, but as you have heard, it was all to no avail.
So, is there a great deal of work left to be done now for the ground crews between now and the new launch time?
Well, the main piece of work is to find out what is wrong with this computer communication. Everything else seems to be working extremely well. What they've got to do in the next few hours is to start unloading the very cold liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen fuels into the tanks nearby the launch pad. They had thought that they might leave the fuel in the tank until the next launch attempt, but the problem with that is that they have to keep topping up the fuel all the time because a lot of it is venting off. And they simply didn't have enough of this fuel at the launch site or at the Kennedy Space Center to enable them to do that for the full 48 hours until the next launch. Well, at last, we're within 2 minutes of the launch, and excitement has reached fever pitch here. Surely nothing can go wrong now. The engines have all just been through their last checks. The liquid hydrogen in the fuel tank has been brought up to flight pressure. The astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen now very tense as liftoff approaches. Crippen has been an astronaut for many years, of course, but this is his first trip into space. John Young, on the other hand, is a very experienced astronaut. This will be his 5th trip into space, his last one being a lengthy stay on the moon's surface. If anything goes wrong, the astronauts could either eject from the shuttle, or they could bring it back to a landing here at the Cape. Or if things are not quite so bad, they could go just once around the Earth and land on a dry lake bed in New Mexico. About 10 seconds before liftoff, the controllers will start the sound suppression system at the launch pad. This consists of the thousands of gallons of water which will cascade out of hoses spraying the ground beneath the shuttle. The purpose of this is to cut back the amount of sound which is reflected off the launch pad soon after liftoff. Now we welcome Radio 4 listeners who've just joined us. The sound of this rocket is so loud that if it bounced back onto the shuttle, it could cause serious damage. The noise from this liftoff is going to be even louder than the noise from the Saturn V moon rocket. Now, T-minus 45 seconds. The space shuttle just 3 miles away from me, looking marvelously white in the sun. The weather is ideal. The main engine on the shuttle will start some 3 seconds before the solid rocket boosters, and then almost immediately this extraordinary-looking vehicle will leave the ground, lifted into the air by over 2,500 tons of thrust. T-minus 21 seconds, and only a short while to go now before launch. T-minus 17 seconds. Let's go to the NASA commentary and join them.
13, T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
And it's away, rising painfully slowly off the launch pad, and it's cleared the tower, and any moment, and here's the roar of the engines and the roar of the crowd here as they wish it well on its way, and here's the engine roar. It's making the very ground beneath me shake. 2,500 tons of thrust is now powering the shuttle up through the atmosphere, accelerating all the time, and the noise is getting louder and louder. 30 seconds into the flight, traveling at several hundred miles an hour, and it's twisting slightly and curving gently away from us, over the Atlantic, and the tails of orange flame are making a fantastic noise, and the shuttle itself is accelerating away, getting smaller and smaller all the time, and the noise is gently dying down now, and the astronauts should be talking to mission control. It's coming up to 57, 58, 60 seconds into the flight, the most critical moment of the launch. The big question is whether the shuttle will be able to stand the enormous pressure now building up. This was the critical point, but everything does seem to be going well. It's now getting further and further away, travelling at well over 1,000 miles an hour now, and accelerating all the time. The speed with which this has almost disappeared out of sight has been quite extraordinary, generating tremendous G-forces on the astronauts. There's a huge column of smoke, and the smoke billowing out from the launch pad still. In about 45 seconds or so, the 2 big rockets on either side of the shuttle should have used up all their fuel, and when that happens, they'll separate from the shuttle and parachute back to Earth. And we can pick up the shuttle now on the television monitor screens being filmed from a high-flying aircraft. It's completely out of sight to us on the ground. All we can see is a huge column of smoke and steam. Any moment now, it's just a faint pinprick in the sky, and any moment now we should have the separation of the main rockets. Still waiting for confirmation. T plus 2 minutes into the flight. A few seconds now, and the solid rocket motor should separate. We can see it on the television monitoring screens, and we can see the flames coming out of the rockets. And there they go. The rockets have separated, and the shuttle's main engines now will take it up to a height of over 70 miles before the main fuel tank comes away to drop back into the Indian Ocean. That should take place in about another 5 minutes.